What's up, YouTube? I'm Guy, and today on the channel we're doing something completely new and different. We're checking out a vintage watch. Admittedly, I am far from an expert when it comes to vintage watches, so you're not going to get my very in-depth feature-length review on this one. I'm just not knowledgeable enough to share that with you, but I do want to take a little bit of time and show you this watch, tell you what I do know about it, and hopefully you'll enjoy that. This Hamilton Sea Rover II is on loan from a viewer, and a big thank you to him and a couple of the other guys over at the Hamilton Watch Owners group on Facebook. If you guys are fans of Hamilton watches like I am, I really do encourage you to go over to that group on Facebook, the Hamilton Watch Owners group, and join up. They've helped me out quite a bit. They've sent me a couple of watches for review. They've been super friendly, and yeah, it's been a great experience. So definitely go over there and check out that group. So again, I reiterate, I am far from an expert when it comes to vintage watches. I will tell you everything that I can about this watch, but mostly I'm just going to give you a little presentation on this specific example of a vintage Hamilton watch, and I hope you guys enjoy that. The vintage watch collecting, subculture within the watch collecting hobby, it's an art and science all of its own. There's tons of information out there, and there's tons of information to absorb and learn, and I'm just not there yet. But I do have an interest in these watches. I've been kind of keeping an eye on them online, on eBay, prices and whatnot, and I'm noticing that the prices have been going up over the last year or so. So if you're interested in vintage watches, particularly Hamilton, like in this example, or Omega, or any of the other brands, I encourage you to try to do what I'm doing. Pick up as much knowledge as you can, start researching the models that you think you'd like to have in your collection, and jump on them sooner than later, because I think eventually they're going to dry up or the prices are going to increase substantially. I think that's an inevitability, and I would not delay if it's something that you want to start getting into. But definitely do the legwork, definitely get knowledgeable, reach out to other people that can hopefully teach you a thing or two about these watches like I've been trying to do. And dive right in, basically. Now, I'm going to jump over to the tabletop here. I'm going to show you this watch. I'm going to tell you the information that I have been able to absorb about it, which again is not going to be super extensive, but it's all I can basically do so far. I hope you enjoy the presentation. I hope you like checking out this watch, and I'll come back over here when we're done with some final closing thoughts. Alright guys, here we have it. We have the Hamilton Sea Rover II. This watch, finding information about it was somewhat difficult, and I suspect that would be the case for any vintage watch, honestly. It's just, there's not a lot out there. When you're researching a watch that's brand new, you can go to the manufacturer's website and get all sorts of technical specifications. That's just not there for this. So what I can share with you is going to be somewhat limited, but here it is. First things first, we'll go over the case dimensions. We have a 33 millimeter case diameter from end to end, not including the crown. That is a very small watch, as you can imagine. Lug width is 18 millimeters, which is fairly standard, and a very good thickness of only 9 millimeters. And when you consider that domed crystal there, that is a really, really thin watch. From lug to lug, from top of the case to the bottom, or from one extremity to the other, we have 39 millimeters. So overall, again, a very small watch. Not going to appeal to every single collector out there, of course. I know people like bigger watches in some cases. Probably, I think the most popular size range is between 38 and 42 millimeters. In comparison to that, yeah, it is a very small watch, but it is a very handsome watch too, and as we zoom in here in a few seconds, you'll see this beautiful dial, and I think you're going to agree that maybe it's worth considering anyway. Now, this watch, again, was made in 1962. It was made for 1 year only, so if you're considering hunting one of these down, I don't know exactly how challenging it's going to be, but considering it was only in production for a year, it could be a little bit on the difficult side. That said, I have looked around a bit, and they're still relatively affordable. I think well below $200 at this point, but I do suspect that those prices are going to rise as the popularity for vintage watches in general, and this model as well, increase, and the availability of models decreases. So keep that in mind. If you are interested in this, I would start doing some research and I'd start hunting them down sooner rather than later. Now, this watch uses, as a movement, a mechanical hand winding movement, and the hand winding action here is very nice. I mean, considering how old this watch is, it's kind of impressive at how refined it feels to hand wind this movement. It's excellent, top notch. Very, very comparable to any modern hand wind watch that I've spent any amount of time with. The movement is called the Caliber 688. It's a Hamilton movement. It is Swiss made. Now, Prior to 1955 or 1954, Hamilton used to make the movements themselves, but at some point they moved over to these Swiss-made movements. Again, after 1955, I guess, not at some point. But this particular movement, the Caliber 688, is based on a pretty good ETA movement, the 2390. Information about that movement, if you're interested, it's a 17 joule hand winding, non-hacking movement. So if you pull the crown out, the movement does not hack, the seconds hand does not stop running. Keep that in mind. It beats at a pretty slow beat rate of 18,000 beats or vibrations per hour. It does have a 47 hour power reserve. Though once you start getting into these older watches and the last date of service, when that starts coming into question, it's probably unreasonable to expect to get that full power reserve. I didn't test this one to see how long the power reserve lasts, but my guess is going to be that it's probably not that full 47 hours, unless it's recently been serviced. And the owner of this watch didn't tell me one way or the other if it had or hadn't been. So a little history that you might find interesting. Maybe you don't know this already, perhaps you do. But around the 1920s, watches started moving away from the pocket watch form factor, and manufacturers started making wristwatches. The norm for decades for wristwatches was between 28 and 32 millimeters. So this being at 33 millimeters, it might be a little bit larger than what was considered normal, though it would be difficult to tell the difference between 32 and 33 with the naked eye. But keep that in mind, up until probably the 1980s, this was more or less the standard when it comes to watch sizes. And if you're interested in finding, vintage watches, this is very often going to be roughly the size that you're going to be looking at. I'll bring in another watch here to show as a basis of comparison for size. I'm going to bring in a 36 millimeter Seiko, and I'm going to set them side by side, and I want you guys to kind of take a look here and just kind of see the difference in overall, size and the dimensions of these watches. It's not significantly smaller, but there is a noticeable difference between the 36 millimeter Seiko on the right and the 33 millimeter Hamilton. So, that's kind of what you're looking at when you're going to be looking at these older vintage watches, certainly watches made prior to the 1980s anyway. So yeah, 33 millimeters was fairly contemporary for the time, but it is very small by today's standards. A little bit of history about Hamilton that you might not be aware of. In 1966, Hamilton acquired the Buren Watch Company and their Swiss manufacturing facilities. And from 1966 to 1969, watches were made both at the Buren factory facilities over there in Switzerland, as well as the American manufacturing facilities in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. It was around 1969 that Hamilton ended production in America and moved all of their manufacturing over to Switzerland. And roughly the mid-1970s, I think 1974, the brand Hamilton was sold to the Swatch Group, although I believe it was called something different at the time. So as we zoom in, you can see that this is a really handsome dial. It's not white, it's kind of silver, maybe an off-white. Fantastic looking layout though. You have the Arabic numerals 12, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 with baton markers, applied markers mind you, at all of the odd numbers, and a nice subtle seconds track on the outer edge of the dial. The handset is pretty simplistic, and if you look at the center of the hands, you can see there's just a little bit of lume in there, and it's only really visible zoomed in like this. To the naked eye from wrist lengths away, it's difficult to even notice that there's lume on that handset. It doesn't work particularly well at this point. I did test it out. There's really no point in me bringing it in the dark and showing you a lume shot. But suffice to say, there is a little bit of lume there, and it does still function ever so slightly. The rest of the watch is pretty simple. It's got a very thin case, as you can see here. It's got a nice domed crystal, which I assume is acrylic, but I'm not 100% certain, so I unfortunately can't confirm that with 100% authenticity, but I believe it is a crystal dome, a dome acrylic crystal. It is nice looking, although you can tell that it's somewhat aged here. Obviously, it's over 50 years old, going on 60, I guess. But yeah, it's overall nice. The case back here is very, very simple. There's just a few markings on it, but otherwise it's basically a blank case back. Very, very thin, delicate lugs, as you can see. And again, they are 18 millimeters in width. This watch is wearing, obviously not the original strap here. If you're curious, I'll give you a quick look. It's a Straps Co. strap. It's a nice leather strap with contrast stitching. It's kind of a blue-gray, but it works for this watch for sure. The crown here is very small and simple. You can kind of see there, if my camera will focus, that is adorned with a small Hamilton H there. Very, very small though and hard to pick up, but it is nice looking. It is definitely functional. It's easy to manipulate and it has good grip, knurling, whatever you would like to call that, on the edge of the crown. The Hamilton branding up at the 12 o'clock side of this dial uses that old stylized H logo, which they've sort of been bringing back on some of their watches in recent years, along with the Hamilton name there. It's just printed on the dial, as well as, the Arabic numerals in the second track. But it's a very clean dial. It's very minimal. It's not busy or distracting. The branding, the printing, it does look good. It's clean. I mean, the dial itself, even after this many years, is still very clean and very nice looking. Overall, it's an absolutely great presentation. I'll go ahead and throw this watch on the wrist so you can see what a 33 millimeter watch looks like on my 6 3/4 inch wrist. It does present pretty small, but yeah, I'll give you guys a look at it real quick. So here's this Hamilton Sea Rover II on my roughly 6 3/4 inch wrist. It is definitely a small presentation. There's no way around that. 33 millimeters in case diameter was fairly contemporary for the time that this watch was made. So keep that in mind. If you're going to be looking around for vintage watches, this is basically what you're going to be looking at. The extremities of each lugs don't even begin to come close to challenging the overall width of my wrist. If you have a much, much smaller wrist, this would probably work better for you, but as your wrist gets larger, you may feel that this is a little bit on the small side. I get that, but I still like it. I could wear it if I wanted to, but to be truthful, it is probably even a little bit too small for my tastes. I would probably prefer something more in the 36 plus millimeter range. But it does look good. It is a very nice looking watch, and I don't absolutely hate it. I could definitely wear it from time to time, and it would be comfortable. So there we have it, guys. That's the Hamilton Sea Rover II. I'm going to jump back over to the studio view. I'm going to close out this video with some final thoughts, and yeah, we'll call it a day. I'll be right back. So in closing, what do I think about the Hamilton Sea Rover II? Well, first things first, it is definitely a very small watch. That's not going to appeal to a lot of people. There's certainly a very big segment of the watch collecting or buying market that wants the larger watches that are a lot more contemporary, the things that manufacturers are making right now. I get that. But for some of us that do find these watches appealing, they are out there, they are available, they're really cool. And this one is no exception. I think I probably mentioned it already, but it's worth reiterating. These watches are still pretty affordable right now, but I suspect that as the market dries up, as people start buying these up, as interest grows, like I think it has been doing over the course of the last year, the prices are going to rise, and they're going to be harder and harder to get at these affordable prices. So you should definitely consider doing your legwork now, getting knowledgeable about these watches, joining Facebook groups or message boards like the Hamilton Watch Owners group over on Facebook. Start asking questions, start doing research, and get ready for what I think is an inevitable increase in price or a decrease in availability on these watches, be it Hamilton, be it Omega, be some of the other more popular vintage brands. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you want to support the channel, there's a few ways that you can do that. Number one, joining my social media accounts and following me over there, be it Facebook, be it Twitter, or even Instagram. That would help me out a lot. Number two, if you want to help me financially, you could always become a Patreon. Can be as little as $1 a month or as much as you feel like donating, but that would help me out greatly. Another way that you can help me financially, which costs you absolutely nothing extra, is to shop on Amazon using my associate link, which is found in the description of every single video I do. If you click on that link before you do your normal Amazon.com shopping, I get a small commission. It doesn't matter what you buy. It could be a book, it could be dog food, it could be a new pair of shoes, or even something that I've reviewed. Whatever it is, I do get a small commission, and that does really add up. I appreciate all of you guys that have been using it. A lot of you have been. Thank you very much. So that's going to close this review out. Until next week, thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you then. Take care now. Bye.